Hi, so we're going to talk about the art of summarizing, which you're going to use in this whole at 9 weeks talking about rhetoric, and you're also very importantly going to use it in your speech that you will be delivering at the end of the quarter. So this is the book, but I have created a PDF for you and this PowerPoint to summarize it. So chapter 1 discussed the significance of stating they say before introducing the I say. What that means is you do your research. What do they say about your topic? Summarize the they say argument as soon as possible in your writing. We want to talk about exactly how to summarize what others are saying. If you can't summarize what others are saying, well, then you run the risk of misinterpreting their ideas. If you don't explain enough of their ideas to preface your own, then people might not understand where you're coming from, or you could talk too much about their ideas and not your own. So imagine you told a very important story to your best friend, and your story says, yesterday something really horrible happened to me. Well, lots of things actually. First, as you know, it was Valentine's Day. I was really excited to see my boyfriend, but he wouldn't answer my calls. It turns out he wanted to break up. Yeah, he dumped me last night. Then, when I got home from school, I got a call from my boss telling me that I had to give up my shifts because they couldn't afford to pay me this weekend. So now imagine somebody else summarizes you incorrectly. And she tells somebody else and she says, hey, so I talked to Katie today. I guess she had a really bad day. Yesterday was V-Day, Well, I guess she and her boyfriend got into this massive fight and he stopped answering her calls. Then this morning she called him, I think from work, and he said he didn't want to be with her anymore. So I guess she got fired too? So no, maybe she wasn't at work this morning, but she got fired. They don't need her anymore. Wouldn't you be kind of annoyed if you heard that kind of retelling of your story? It's inaccurate, it falsely represents you, and you can't even defend yourself. So this shows how important it is to accurately summarize somebody else's argument. You wouldn't want to misrepresent or misquote somebody and have them find out, right? Well, it's just as bad in your research papers or your speeches. So let's go over why is it that some writers don't summarize another author's argument, the they say, to give context for what they're writing. Well, maybe they just don't want to go back to the reading and figure out what it really says. Laziness. Maybe they have trouble understanding it. If that's the case, maybe find a different source. Maybe they fear that they'll spend too much time devoted to the arguments of others and not on their own. It's good to quote other people. That's the ethos part where you say, not only do I believe this, but this doctor believes it as well, or this expert in the field believes it as well. So that is not a problem. Don't worry about that. They think that maybe by responding to an assigned article, they're already on topic and therefore don't need to summarize. This is really, really a problem. What I tell my students all the time is, even if you know that I, as your teacher, read the article that you were summarizing, write your response as if you're writing it for people in the other classroom next door who haven't read it. You always need to reference what you're talking about. So our biggest summarizing mistakes are writers do not write enough of what others are saying, or writers write too much of what other authors are saying. So you want a delicate balance of the both. What should you be trying to achieve? You should balance what the original author is saying with your own unique, creative, personal ideas. Not too much of quoting other people, but not only talking about your own opinion without quoting experts. It can be tricky. You're looking outward to the author and inward towards yourself, which means when you come up with your topic, you really want to think it through. So, writing theorist Peter Elbow came up with a believing game. And what he says is that you take what someone else has read and assume the beliefs, opinions of those in the conversation instead of talking about your own beliefs. Instead of thinking about your own beliefs, for a minute, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. The other thing that's very helpful is take the position of somebody who disagrees with your point. What would they say to it? That helps you to not sound biased. A list summary is something you do not want to do. And if you've ever seen one, you know it's pretty boring. You just summarize what's being said without any thinking, with no analysis. You are just saying he states, then the author states, and then he says, and finally he concludes. And you never explain why you use that quote to support your own larger overall claim. So do not do this. You should, a whole nother section in this chapter talks about signal verbs and how you want to introduce your quotations. So you want to avoid bland formulas like she says or they believe. Instead, use vivid, precise signal verbs such as she admires, she acknowledges, he agrees that, or even while he agrees that, he ultimately believes that, he praises, but don't say praise when it's not, a point of view is not being praised. Look up what these words mean. Some signal verbs that show disagreement are complain. He complains that even though she thought her point out, she didn't include blah, blah, blah. He denies. She contradicts what this other person says, but she has a point. Reject, refute. Look up what these words mean. A little hint is memorize a few of these stronger signal verbs and work them into your arsenal. Work them into your toolkit. You definitely have options to use besides states and claims. And if you want to take some notes, here are some other ones. In addition to acknowledge, admire, agree, praise, extol, and endorse, other verbs for expressing agreement are celebrate the fact that, corroborate, do not deny, reaffirm, support, or verify. Verbs for questioning or disagreeing include complain, deny, contradict, reject, refute, complicate, contend, deplore the tendency to, qualify, question, reject, renounce, repudiate. If you want to make recommendations, you may advocate for something. You might call for something to happen. You might demand that something happen. Encourage, exhort, implore, plead, recommend, urge, warn. There are other verbs in this book, and I'm going to attach the PDF to this lesson. So the review is that effectively summarizing is the best way to introduce what others are saying. You want to basically use what I call the quote sandwich. You want to introduce your quote and give the context. Then you want to cite your quote, and then you want to explain your quote. You may have heard this as ICE, introduce, cite, and explain. Always saying, don't just list, but say why this quote supports your point, your topic statement. Put yourself into the author's shoes. Put yourself into your listener's shoes. Strike a balance between summarizing the arguments of others and your own argument. Remember to use strong signal verbs to enhance your summaries, and only use evidence that supports your claims. Now remember, one of your claims will be a counterclaim. So that means you're going to find an article that says the opposite of what you believe. You're going to talk about it, and then you're going to refute it with a statement like, while X states, and then say the opposite of what you believe, whatever they say, it still makes more sense too, and then you reassert your own point. I hope this has helped you create your own speech and write your own summaries.